Hey there, everybody. I am Jeff. This is Tabletop Toolbox, and this is the 99th episode of the terribly named weekly Ratchet. Why so? Well, because this is only the 9th episode I have filmed this entire year. But hey, in this episode, I'm going to talk about some big games, some new games, some big older games, and maybe even some stuff in between. And what will be a very exciting episode that will air eventually. Gah! Yes, hello there, everyone. Welcome back to the Weekly Ratchet. I hope you have had a good couple of weeks of getting to play some games with family and or friends. I feel like this is becoming just par for the course in these episodes to say, well, the past couple of weeks have been insane. But they have been. I think I mentioned in the previous episode that I was heading back to Charlotte. It's kind of become a monthly thing. And of course, now the trips have become longer because at the end of my trip to Charlotte, I head over to Asheville to spend a couple of days with my father, who of course is now an unfortunate widow. And of course, this past weekend, well, the previous, was Father's Day. So I wanted to be able to at least spend some time that day with him. Took him out for a nice breakfast. We had a good time together. Played some disc golf. That was a lot of fun. It was good to kind of get back out in the course and play with my old man. Of course, as soon as I came back, I was told, hey, there's another big meeting coming up in Charlotte. Can you come back down this week? And so I had to fly down for a day and a half for another big meeting that ended up not being a big meeting much at all. But that has just become my life lately. It's just constantly one thing after the next, and it's all around work. And when it's not work, it's trying to work on this house. And I'm falling apart. But hey, you know what? You're not here for any of that. You're here for some board games. Let's get to some games. All right, well, everything being what it is, I have gotten to play some games lately, although, of course, now I'm going back a couple of weeks into some of these titles that I have been playing. I mentioned, I think in maybe 97 or so, that I picked up a copy of Skara, Brae. This is from Shem Phillips Garfield Games and is illustrated by Sam Phillips, who is Shem Phillips' brother. I have played a lot of the Garfield games, and I have not been shy about the fact that I really just don't tend to enjoy them. They sort of all score very similar mechanisms and just have different ways of getting to those mechanisms. I'm also just not a fan of the Miko's illustrations. Miko does a lot of his, Northwest, South, whatever kingdom games. So Raiders and Shipbuilders and Viscounts and all those. I think Viscounts might be the only one that I haven't played. But I'm just not a big fan of his art. I, however, quite like Sam Phillips' illustrations. And so, of course, I played Legacy of You, which I've talked about a couple times here in the channel. And I saw this at a store, and it was recognizable as Sam Phillips' art, and it made me take a closer look at the box. This is a game that has players managing a small village. It's very much like Legacy of You in its sort of theming and a little bit in its approach, although I would call it a fairly different game. But in Legacy of You, you're trying to expand, you're trying to sort of build into the province, I believe, of China. And of course, you're also getting attacked by barbarians along the way, and you've got to manage kind of multiple fronts. This is really a very peaceful game. Yeah, you have a player board in front of you. It has 2 tracks on it, one of them for furnishings, the other one for trading. You then have 10 action tiles off to the right. They are arranged in a very specific pattern, and the 10th action tile bottom right will differ from game to game. There's a couple different ones that you'll be sort of drafting from, and I even went and picked up the Kickstarter add-on, which has 2 extra tiles that were only available through the Kickstarter or purchased separately from their store. You've also then got a deck of cards, and every round is going to have you drafting cards from a central sort of pile on the table. This plays up to 4, so you're going to be drafting anywhere from like 4 to 5 different cards. Those cards, a lot of them are going to be villagers that kind of get tucked under those action tiles. They're going to generate resources for you every time that you attack, and the more cards you have, the more resources you get. The other types of cards just kind of go underneath your player board, and they give you some sort of, maybe small benefits throughout the game. They may not necessarily give you resources when you play them. And then after you draw and place a card, you're then going to place all of your available workers. You start with one worker in the first round, and then the fourth round you'll have 4 workers, so you're getting 1 worker each round. You have 1 large and 3 small workers. Each action tile can only hold 1 small worker, but your large worker can get placed wherever you have a small worker. That's kind of it. So you're going to be, you're going to draft. Basically, you have 4 rounds of 3 turns. The turns are basically simultaneous. You'll take your turns drafting a card, but then once you've drafted, you can just go ahead and start placing all your workers and doing whatever you want to do. Once everyone has taken a card and played all their workers, that round ends, or that sort of turn ends, and you repeat the process. Like I said, you're going to have 3 actions per 4 rounds. So you're going to have 12 cards that you're playing throughout the game. But I did the math. I think it was something like 30 actions that you could take. Maybe it's 28 or 30, something like that. Because like I said, you're getting extra workers in each of those rounds. And the really interesting thing with this is that you're trying to upgrade those action tiles. You're flipping them over throughout the game to get more powerful actions or cheaper actions out of those tiles. But you have a small space on your player board for resources. I think there's maybe 12 or 15, maybe 10 or 12 columns of 3 rows. And each resource that you get has to get placed in one of those little spaces. You've got a little cardboard strip that sits in that display, and it shows you the limit of resources you can hold, except for that you can slide that tile to the right at any time you want for free. You can just make more room for more resources. However, there are 2 spaces on that little piece. At the bottom will eventually reveal a red number, and that's how many points you're going to lose at the end of the game. The top space is going to reveal how much Midden you collect at the end of each of those rounds. So every 3 turns, you'll gain Midden, which is literally waste, refuge. Even a dung pile is one of the definitions of that word. And so literally it's this idea that the more that you have, the more space you have for things, ideally, or sort of representing how large your village has gotten, is how much waste you are producing. That Midden that you collect goes into that same resource area. So it may even force you to further expand your storage if you're gaining a lot of Midden. And at the end of the game, each Midden you have is a negative point. And again, that space in the bottom of that little tile is additional negative points. So the whole game is trying to manage your resources. Obviously, you're trying to be able to afford the expansion. Those 2 tracks I mentioned, you're going to be spending resources to climb those tracks. The furnishings track will give you more points for each card that you have and each set of cards you have. There's kind of like 4 different colors, 4 different resources that they can give you. And so if you have a set of 1 of each, you can get some extra points. And then that trading track, again, is just a way to get a lot of end game score. So you're trying to manage your resources to do all that, to climb those tracks, to get these action tiles flipped over. If you play the solo game, there are also some challenge cards that you'll have out. One is a card that you have to have the condition met at the end of the game. The other, I think, 4 are simply cards that you have to trigger at any point during the game, spending the resources shown on them to get a free action, although it's not actually free. You have to still pay the cost of that action as if you had placed a worker on that action tile, on the represent action tile. And then you get to flip that card over. And those 5 cards are negative points if you have not accomplished them or met their conditions by the end of the game. And so again, it's this village management game. You're trying to gain a lot of resources, but you're also trying to spend them very efficiently. You're trying not to gain too much stuff you don't really need. There is a big system, especially those extra action tiles. Each of them require being triggered by food or literally bones. So there are animals that you're sort of collecting throughout the game. You can either go and gather them. The trading track will also give you animals, and you may have some extra chances throughout card draws to get animals. And you can cook those animals, which provides hides, bones, and food, sometimes wool if it's a sheep. And that will then let you do a bunch of other things. But again, if you find yourself cooking, I like to use the word cooking versus, say, slaughtering. But anyways, cooking a bunch of animals to get the food that you need. Because again, at the end of every round, you have to feed all the villagers that you have, unless you have gotten rooftops or sort of dwellings throughout the game. That kind of reduces how many people you have to feed. So you can be gaining a lot of food, but also generating a lot of extra hides and bones that if you're not efficiently turning around and spending, they just sort of clog up the space in your player board. So again, it's this really, really intricate management system. The first time I played this, I did not do well at all, which is not very surprising. But then I kind of started to get it, and the more and more I've played it, the more I have just enjoyed the puzzly challenge. And definitely, now the first time I played it, I tried to be ultra conservative in how many resources I spent. I didn't want to have to move that little marker to the right at all. I have, of course, since realized that you have to allow that to happen. You just kind of have to plan at the end of the game or towards the end of the game to do the cleaning action quite frequently and at the most powerful levels once you've upgraded that action tile to get rid of that midden, to move that marker back down. And even then I've had times where at the end of the game I still end up with just a lot of extra resources I did not have time to spend because I was gaining so much stuff. I've upgraded everything. I've kind of done a lot of stuff. But again, I just kind of wound up with things that I just didn't need, and you cannot just throw away resources whenever you want. So I like this. I will say that it's kind of repetitive after a while. I mean, I've already played this maybe 5 or 6 times. It's also a little bit of a bear to set up. There are, I believe, 16 different resources. These little painted wooden components. Very, very nice looking. I really, really like the sort of deluxe feel of this game to imagine that there's that much stuff in this little box. But what I've had to resort to doing is I literally have a bag that's just filled with a couple of each component. I dump it out at the start of my game for a solo game, and I just play with that, so I don't have to keep opening 16 different little bags to get out my resources. I was going to maybe do like a little Plano box organizer. You can, of course, buy an organizer. I don't really think it's necessary. And the only other thing I'll say is that I have played this multiplayer. I played it with my wife, and I played it with Daniel. There's just so little interaction that there's no need to play this multiplayer. It's very much like the, it's not Raiders of Scythia. It's one of his other kind of town building games. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head. It's kind of a flip and right game. Someone will mention it in the comments. But same thing. There's almost no reason to play that with other people because there is just no interaction. You're working on your own puzzle, doing your own thing. I do not care what anyone else is doing, as long as they're doing it honestly, and that's one thing you got to kind of manage. But other than that, a neat game, a neat puzzle, a great looking game. I love Sam's art. Skara, Brae. Up next, this one was kind of fun. I'll move this box out of the way. Daniel and I got together before my long trip down to Charlotte, and we played, oh man, this box has gotten so heavy. Tapestry with the Arts and Architecture expansion. This is a fairly old game from Stonemaier Games. In fact, definitely one that has sort of fallen off the radar, I think, for a lot of folks. It is a abstract game. And one of the biggest complaints when this game came out, which, by the way, this was the game that came out right after Wingspan. And so I think a lot of people, myself included, had very, very high hopes and almost high standards, if you will, for Tapestry. I was still relatively new in the gaming hobby when this game came out. I had heard all of the crazy buzz, all the Twitter, if you will, about Wingspan. And so I thought, well, Tapestry's going to be huge. It's a Civ game. I mean, who doesn't love a good Civ game? I think I bought 2 copies of this, expecting I could offload my second copy for a ton of money. I did not. But anyways, one of the biggest complaints about it was how abstract it was. And since then, we have seen a ton of Civilization games come out, like Mosaic and others that I can't think about right off the top of my head, like the Epix game, for example, that are equally as abstract. And some of those games, like Mosaic especially, is quite popular and doesn't even do a whole lot of different stuff from what Tapestry does. Now, this game is all about tracks. There are 4 tracks that go around this map in the middle of the table. And those tracks are, there's like military, there's science, there's exploration, and I cannot for the life of me remember what the 4th one is, but I think it has to do with technology, maybe food, something like that. And on your turn, you will spend resources to advance one of your markers along that track. Mostly, that's what you'll do on your turn. I think it's called an advancement action. So the one track is going to have you finding new tiles, drafting new tiles, placing them out on this board, gaining extra resources for sort of, discovering, exploring the map around you. The other one will have you placing more military, sort of expanding your civilization across this map. You put out little towers representing your influence. and you're going to get a lot of points, maybe some resources from doing that as well. The other one's going to have you gaining technology cards. Those cards sit next to your player board. You'll have chances throughout the game to advance those cards, kind of moving them up this little spot on the side of your player board, gaining extra resources, extra benefits, maybe points, who knows, whatever else. And then the other track is science, which is a little bit varied in what it does. I've seen it, it can generate resources for you, it can generate extra income, which I'll kind of get into here in a moment. It also is the only track that features a die, and you'll be frequently rolling that die as you advance on that track, which will advance you up the other tracks, or the same track, or the science track, but sometimes getting the benefit, sometimes not, of the space that you advance to. And then we played with the Arts and Architecture expansion. This adds a 5th track to the game, all about arts and architecture. It adds some new cards. I'm trying to remember even what they're called. There are masterpiece cards. So you get these masterpiece cards. They actually sort of sit on your player board. They did not come out with new player boards for this. It just tells you to kind of use an existing space on your player board. And then every one of your income steps, which is basically once you've run out of resources or you simply don't want to take any additional actions, you will trigger your next sort of era of your civilization. Very much like Everdell in that, okay, I'm out of things to do, so I'll go ahead and advance into the next era. You generate new resources, you generate new points, you might move up those technology cards, all kinds of stuff. And in the Arts and Architecture, you trigger off these masterpiece cards, and they do a lot of the same stuff, right? Maybe generating resources, maybe giving you some extra benefits, things that you can do. There are also these inspiration tiles. These sit, so on the top of your player board in Tapestry, you have 4 little tracks, not really tracks, but they relate to the 4 base tracks of the base game. And they have little buildings on them, little plastic, nice 3D miniature buildings. And throughout the game, you're going to have opportunities to remove those buildings from those tracks and put them onto your map. You have your own little personal map representing your capital city. At each of your income stages, you're going to generate any of the resources or points or other things that you have uncovered on those tracks at the top of your player board. Well, this expansion adds little extra tiles that you kind of replace. You cover the existing tracks on your board with these tiles, and they can greatly amplify the points you can get, maybe some of the resources that you can get if you have advanced far along that track. And you can replace that token even if you haven't removed all the buildings. Just kind of move the buildings on that tile, you set it onto your player board. And I did that to pretty good effect in this game. I think I got 1 or 2 of those out. For example, it takes that end game, or the last scoring value on that track, I think on the base game is maybe 5 points or 10 points, and this amps it up to 10 or 20. Like, it doubles that scoring of that final space. So if you can get all those buildings out of that particular track and then upgrade that track with this, you can score a ton of points in this expansion. However, it does also kind of it dilutes your ability to advance on those tracks. So as I mentioned, you're paying resources to advance on these tracks. You're only going to get so many resources throughout the game. This one does not necessarily generate a whole bunch of extra resources, at least in our playthrough. And so with an extra track to try and manage, I felt like I didn't get nearly as far along any of the tracks as I have in previous plays of this. And I didn't get as high of a final score as I've seen. I think I barely broke maybe 250 points, something like that. You can easily score up to 300 in this game. But it was still a really, really neat puzzle to try and kind of say, okay, what I like about this game a lot is to say, I can advance on this track. I've talked about this before in these types of games. Okay, I can do this action. It's going to cost me 3 things, and then I'm out. I can't do anything. But if I do this action, which only costs me 2 things, well, it's going to generate this. It's going to let me move that. That's going to generate something. This is going to generate. So now I'm going to get 2 or 3 more resources. Now I can then go and do what I was going to do anyways, but I've advanced a little further in other aspects of this game. Maybe I have an extra action. Maybe I can even find something else to do, or an extra resource, I mean. Maybe I can use that to try and generate another resource and still get to go and do the things I wanted to do, stopping to do other things along the way. So there's definitely an efficiency puzzle to it. There is a action priority sort of sequencing that you can focus on to, again, say, Instead of just doing this one thing, I can find a path that lets me do 3 other things and still get this thing done in a way that just feels so much more rewarding. And so it's especially fun in a game like this when everyone else is tapped out. You're like, shoot, I got 3-4 more turns I can take, guys. Hold up, watch this. I like Tapestry, and in fact, after we played this, I went and I bought the last couple of expansions and even the big map, the mat, player mat for this thing, which kind of helps organize everything a little bit better on the table. I still like Tapestry. The only thing I'll say, it's become a bit of a bear to set up with all these boxes. There's also the Plans and Ploys, I think, expansion, which we did use. It adds like a little interim goal that you can work towards to get an extra building. These little 3D miniatures, again, they sit on your capital board, and as you fill up that capital board, it gives you extra points, extra resources, etc. And so it becomes a lot to set up. It definitely becomes a lot to manage, but it becomes a very chewy, thinky puzzle, and I just continue to enjoy Tapestry. I'm even looking forward to trying out that extra. There's like a futuristic civilization expansion, and there are, if you're one of those who have felt that the game was unbalanced, there were a lot of complaints about certain factions being stronger than other factions, they now have a pack that you can buy. It wasn't even very expensive, that gives you all reprints of all the existing factions, especially from the base game, I think, and Plans and Ploys, and is supposed to just further balance everything out. We haven't used it yet. Like I said, it just came in, but I'm not really good enough at the game to sort of get into those exploits. And also, I think it takes a lot of very, very careful getting things at just the right time to really be able to exploit some of those factions. There is so much variety in that box that things can go just wildly in a unique direction for you with each play. Anyways, that was Tapestry with the Arts and Architecture expansion. The last game I'll talk about here at the beginning of this series is In the Hall of the Mountain King. I actually did not write down who this was by, designer or publisher. But this is a game that I have played before. I played this in Charlotte when I was down there on my trip. I mentioned, I think, in the last episode, finding Mighty Meeple, the Mighty Meeple store on the northeast part of Charlotte. Really, really nice location. And they have a Tuesday night game night. Of course, a bunch of people playing Magic and other stuff, but they have a large table reserved just for board games. And so I joined the same group I'd played with last time. I think I had played the Cape May game. And this time I played In the Hall of the Mountain King. Now, I had played this before at the Dice Tower Retreat. I played it with some friends. I'm blanking on names right now. Dan Hughes of the one Sporadically Bored podcast. Well, I'm really struggling with names all of a sudden. Anyways, I got to play it with Dan Hughes and I think Eric Matthews. And it was a really, really fun gaming experience with those two guys. I didn't really love the game that much, but this is a kind of a mixture of a polyomino, of course, resource management type of game. You've got this basic board in front of all the players. You've got these little plastic statues all over the place that start off. You've got sort of a player board with just a couple of, player aid type information on it. And you start off with 4 cards of like orcs that are part of your kind of clan, if you will. And there's terms for all this stuff. I don't remember what all the terms are. But on your turn, you have a couple different actions that you can or must take. So if you have a particular type of resource, like a gem of some kind, you can spend it to activate a magic spell. There are always 3 spells available. You can trigger one of them. They're a one-time use. When they get used, they go to the bottom of the deck, and they might cycle back through, although I don't think we quite got all the way through that deck in a 4-player game. You can also trigger... if you have any workshops, which is a tile that you can kind of find on the board once you have built up against a certain type of space. So these are workshop spaces on the board. You can then place a workshop of your choice in that space, and as long as you maintain a connection of your tunnels on this board to that workshop, you can optionally activate it on your turn. And then you will do one of 2 things. You will either draft a new orc and put it into your sort of display in front of you, or you will use your resources to further excavate into this mountain. So let's talk about that first. You're going to be placing these polyomino tiles onto this board. Again, it's a common board. You're all on the same board. You each sort of start in a corner. And you're working into the middle of this mountain. There's kind of a volcano space in the middle of this mountain. And you'll probably see on some of the pictures that there are these different colors of spaces. It's like black, gray, kind of maybe a dark orange, light orange, and a red. I can't exactly remember how many colors there are. And as you get into as you work towards the middle, those spaces become more valuable. So you're placing polyomino tiles, you're building them by spending different resources from your display. You've got, I think it was wood, and then stone, and then ore. And you're placing the same tiles no matter which resource you're spending, but you're going to get more points if you spend the more valuable resources. And you score those things right away. So as you're digging into this mountain, you'll also have the opportunity to start moving some of these idols, those little statues. You can move them into your available spaces. You're eventually trying to find bases. Those bases, those little sort of stands that these things can sit on, they come from the display of orcs that you can recruit into your tableau. Now, each of the orcs that you recruit have resources printed on them. When you place a new orc into your display, you're literally building a temple. So you have 4 cards on the bottom right away from the beginning of the game. You're going to recruit 3, and then 2, and then 1. So you're going to recruit a total of 6 more for a grand total of 10 orcs in your tableau. So you have to build this pyramid. When you put an orc in, you will generate his resources and any orcs that are beneath him in that pyramid. So obviously when you place the 10th guy, every orc underneath him is going to generate their resources, unless they still have resources sitting on them, in which case they'll only generate the blank ones, the ones that you have spent. So when you're gaining resources, they will typically sit on those cards, and you have to leave them there until you spend them. There are a couple ways that you'll get excess resources. They just sit off to the side, and so you can spend from your display first before you take from your own personal supply, and that way you can kind of regenerate those resources. And so, like I said, you're going to be gaining magic crystals to spend magic actions. You're going to be gaining these wheelbarrows that let you move those idols around. You're going to be gaining the wood, the stone, the ore to let you build the more valuable, or to be able to build those polyomino tiles, but getting more points for doing so. And then there's a couple of the spots on the board that kind of have a unique icon on it. It's like rubble. And you have to have like an extra pickaxe for every rubble space that you cover. And it's kind of interesting. I mean, it is a unique sort of a twist between, okay, do I just gain a bunch of resources? Do I sort of bide my time between building and gaining more orcs? You don't want to necessarily race too quickly because you actually trigger the end game as people start to fill out their tableau of orcs. That's what will eventually trigger the end of the game. And so, okay, yeah, I want to go ahead and maybe get my 10th guy out because I'm going to get some extra points for being the first person to finish that. But then I'm also sort of racing towards the end game. So if I don't have some good points set up for me ahead of time, it may not be worth it to me. In fact, the first time I played this, I went into the end game scoring with the most points. I was way ahead of everybody on the overall scoring of the game. But then there's a bunch of stuff that scores you at the end of the game, like having these idols. You actually want to have the idols on a base in those more valuable tiers towards the middle of the board. There are also these tiles that if you sort of build a large enough space of these polyomino tiles, like a contiguous area of those polyominoes, you can then place these grand halls or something like that. You can place these tiles over top that then give you a bunch of endgame points, and you can get even more points if you get an idol into a particular space on that tile, but then the idols don't count towards the tiers of blah blah blah. It kind of gets to be a bunch of weird stuff at the endgame scoring. But the first time I played this, I didn't really love it. I got to this gaming event in Charlotte. I was late getting there. They hadn't started yet, but they already had the game out and sort of set up. I was really hoping to get Fortunes of Scoundrel Bay played at 4. Wasn't able to make that happen. But I saw this and I was like, okay, I guess I'll play this game. And I did better with it. I did try to be a lot more careful in what I did and how quickly I advanced, trying to make sure that I got the most out of my resources, tried to use the magic stuff. The only big problem I felt with those magic tiles is that, okay, I use one, maybe it's not a great action, but okay, it kind of maybe helps me a little bit. And then the next card comes out, like, oh, that's an awesome magical spell. And the chances of it still being there when it gets back to me is virtually zero. And in most cases, I was correct. So you can't really plan for that stuff because it's just not going to be there. I kind of wish that maybe they would sit out there. Maybe they could get used a couple of times before they went away. I don't know, something like that. But it was still a decent playthrough. It was nice to get to check this out as with a little bit more gaming experience under my belt in the Hall of the Mountain King. That's it for games here at the start of the show. Let's get to Question of the Week. All right, this week I asked, I think what was maybe a little bit of a difficult question because I didn't get that many answers. It also is kind of the summer when people don't get to kind of catch up on YouTube as much as they might like to, so I understand that as well. But I asked you, when have you had a chance to share the board gaming love? And I was looking for stories where you kind of got to suddenly maybe realize that someone else was a gamer, maybe interact with someone you didn't know was a gamer, and just kind of suddenly found yourself in a conversation where you got to talk about the love of board gaming. And I got some decent stories. Up first was Red Panda Games, who once saw a mutual friend in a board gaming Facebook page. He reconnected with the lady whom he knew from his younger days and now frequently plays games with her on Board Game Arena. That is really neat, getting to sort of find out, oh gosh, I forgot about this person. Oh my gosh, they're a big gamer. That's really awesome. And getting to reconnect with someone, maybe you didn't know them that well then. Now you know them a lot better now. A pretty cool story. Up next was Tony Lawhorn, who shares his love of gaming in professional networking groups and events he attends. He routinely hands out social party games that he knows go well with non-gamers at holiday events as well. I know Tony is a independent business owner, and so yeah, I know he does a lot of those types of events, and definitely a good idea when you can kind of get people to even, maybe who even aren't gamers, who have no experience with it, to kind of go, oh, this is kind of neat. This sounds something like something I might have a lot of fun with. Up next was Jeremy Brooks, who shared a story of an interview in which his love of gaming came up, and he used the opportunity to explain how still playing Dungeons and Dragons helps develop teamwork skills towards reaching a common goal. And to top it all off, he got the job. I have certainly had some interviews where folks go, well, what do you like to do for your personal time? And I go, well, here we go. And I had an interview where, because I never got into Dungeons and Dragons, not because I didn't like it or didn't want to, I just never had a good group for it. But something came up about gaming, I think in my previous interview when I worked at Dominion. And that guy was kind of familiar with gaming. Didn't game himself, but even he kind of recognized that, being able to sort of plan, to sort of recognize a challenge and be able to figure out your best strategy to accomplish that goal was certainly a valuable skill to have. And I have always said, especially in the more recent years, that I don't know if I want to use the word love, but my ability to read a rule book, absorb it, and then re-disseminate that information in a way to others that helps them to understand how to play the game, maybe better than just reading the rule book, has certainly been useful in my training abilities, especially very, very recently. So yeah, I do love a good connection between career and gaming. I think that's a really, really strong story. And lastly, Dee Evergrace had a very cool story to share about meeting a fellow game enthusiast through a Secret Santa event at a previous employer. While he doesn't work or live in that area anymore, he and his former colleague still keep in touch. Yeah, that's a really cool story. I had an event where, sort of a story where I was selling a game to someone, I think through like Facebook, and found out that they worked in my office building. They were like, well, yeah, I'm downtown in the Dominion building. I said, I'm downtown in the Dominion building. And so I was able to just literally go to his floor and put the game on his desk, which was kind of funny. We had talked about trying to get together and even create a gaming event at that company, but it was like a half-hour drive to get to work. Why would I want to go down there and game instead of trying to find something local to my own house? But anyways, still a pretty neat story. One of my favorite for sort of sharing the board game love, and I actually shared this story on the Dice Tower channel, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 years ago, was when I was at a Barnes & Noble. I think it was actually my birthday. And I was at Barnes & Noble. We were killing some time before a dinner reservation. And I was walking around the little game selection, which I actually just did the other day at a different Barnes & Noble. And there were two girls walking around, kind of, college age maybe. And they were just, oh, what's this game? Oh, this looks neat. What's this one about? And the one girl picked up the game of Planet, asked her friend, oh, look at this one. This one looks neat. I wonder what it's about. And I couldn't stop myself. I said, hey, actually, that's about building planets. You get to put these little tiles in this magnetic dodecahedron. You're trying to attract different animals to live in that planet. It's just a very, very simple, fun, colorful game. My family and I have a lot of fun with it. I like to kind of post our selfies with our planet. It's a pretty neat one. And though they thanked me for that, thanks for letting us know. That sounds really cool. I walked away, went upstairs. And as I was standing on the balcony up above where my daughter was looking at books, I saw the two girls walking out with their purchased copy of Planet. And I always found myself wondering, so to this day, like, did they ever get to play it? Did they have a lot of fun with it? Have they introduced friends to it? Have they gone back for other games? Like, I just kind of wonder what, if anything, came out of that experience. And that was when I got to share the board game love. That is it for Question of the Week. Thank you for your answers as always. Let me tell you about a few more games. All right, two more games to wrap up the end of the show with. Now, the first one is a very, very big, popular game. This thing is ranked high in the 8s on Board Game Geek, and it is number 27 currently on the top 100. I played A Feast for Odin. This is by Uwe Rosenberg. I don't have this game, thus the image here in the corner of the screen. My buddy Daniel brought it. He had been playing this a good bit solo lately and was just chomping at the bit to get to play this thing competitively because I think he knew he was going to blow my doors off with this game. Uwe Rosenberg games follow a very, very common theme, right? A lot of his games sort of focus around farming. There's a lot of animals in a lot of his games. There's a feeding mechanism in basically every single one of his games. But I do feel like this game is really quite far off of his beaten path because while you're doing all of that, you are farming, you're gaining animals, you're maybe either getting food from those animals, maybe gaining resources from having those animals without necessarily spending the animals. And of course, you have to feed your people, if I didn't already say that. But there is this display in front of you with just all these icons on it and all these little coin symbols. And you're going to be covering this space with these polyomino tiles of a wide variety of different shapes and sizes. And as you're covering those spaces, there's a couple things you want to make note of. I mentioned that there are sort of this diagonal row of coins, and that is your income. And the lowest visible income marker is how much income you'll get at the end of each of the rounds. I think there are maybe 7 rounds in the game, if I recall. But you can only cover an income marker if you have covered all the spaces below and to the left of that income marker, which of course you can do at the same time. If I kind of place a token that covers that currency and the last of the spaces below it and to the left, that's legal, that's fine. But there are also spaces on the board that you may not necessarily want to cover, and they show various bonuses that you can also get during those income phases. You want to surround those symbols without actually covering them. They are considered to be covered for the purpose of covering the income tokens. And then as you get in the outer sort of rows and columns of that display, you're going to see a bunch of negative ones, and those are points that you will lose at the end of the game if you have not covered those spaces. Now, the tiles that you're placing onto this come from a variety of different sources. There are things that you can literally forge. There are certain times that you can spend resources or spend workers, whatever, to take these sort of larger tiles, swords, weapons, crosses, shields, even a golden crown. And they occupy a bunch of space. So if you can put them on your board, they're going to cover up a bunch of tokens. And I should mention, you can kind of put stuff wherever you want. You just can't cover the money symbols until you're able to legally do so. But if you want to just start putting stuff out over those -1 spaces, you can do that. You're just not helping your income any. You're just improving your end game score. And you can also get, well, actually, let me come back to that. You're also going to be getting these tiles throughout the game. So this is a worker placement game. You're putting workers out on this board. Every round, you're going to get an additional worker. I think you start with maybe six or seven, and you're going to get another, 5 or 6, whatever, throughout the rest of the game. You can be placing them out on this board, and I think there are more or less actions depending on how many people are playing. And you're going to be getting things. You might get food. Again, you might get animals. But throughout the game, you're going to be able to upgrade those tiles. There are 4 grades to each tile. And if I remember, it's yellow or kind of an orange, and then red, and then green, and then blue. On that main area of your board, you cannot put red or yellow tiles. You can only put green or blue. But if you put green, green can't sit next to other greens. They can only touch it maybe a corner if they touch at all. But they cannot share a space with an edge with another green tile. Blue tiles can go anywhere they want. So obviously there is incentive to try and upgrade into the blue tiles so you can put stuff wherever you want. At the end of each round, you're going to feed your people. You can only feed your people with yellow or red tiles, or money, which is a twist I thought was always pretty funny. But again, you can't put yellow tiles next to yellow tiles. You can put reds next to yellow. I don't know if you can put reds next to red. Honestly, I have no idea. But you can also just put down a coin. And so as you're removing workers, you kind of reveal this row where the workers used to sit. And you have to be able to fill that row with food or money. But again, there's a twist where if you want to use the same type of food, it has to stand vertically or something weird like that. Because even though you're feeding different people, you can't feed them the same kind of food. I don't know. And if you're putting down coins, well, the coin only occupies one space, so it's the least efficient way to feed your people. But it's also kind of funny because it's like, I don't have any food for you, go to McDonald's or something like that, which I just always thought was humorous. But there are so many of these weird, nuanced little rules and where tiles can go and what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do that it just completely, in my opinion, kills any theme that might be there. You don't have any real notion that you're building anything or that you're forging anything or that you're managing this complex sort of culture or civilization, anything like that. You're just trying to get tiles. You're trying to convert tiles into tiles. You're trying to make sure you have something that is a food value to feed your people, trying to kind of make sure that you can just fill many of these spaces as you possibly can. There is also certain actions you can take. You can get boats. If you have certain types of boats, you can either go whaling or you can go fishing, whatever. You can also go and sort of, I guess it is, inhabit other civilizations. You can find like other islands that you can move into, I guess. Again, the theme kind of gets lost. But you're gaining these tiles, and they do the same thing. They give you more spaces, just like your own player board, that you can cover with green or blue tiles. But some of them might actually be worth more income. They might give you better benefits, better things that you can get if you surround those icons on your board. They will also give you negative points, but they're generally smaller. They start giving you income quicker, and they're generally easier to cover those negative spaces. And so Daniel, to his credit, did a good job at sort of explaining that you should try and get those tiles as quick as you can. Don't really worry so much about the income on your player board. Just try to cover the negative values and then use those extra boards to cover to get your income, to get your extra resources, get your other bonuses, and negate any negative points. I couldn't get my head around that. To me, I have this thing in front of me. I need to focus on this thing in front of me. I want to min-max and I want to get all the things filled. And I did do a pretty good job at covering that board by the end of the game. But as a result, I only got one other little island board. I had only gotten a couple of points from it and just got cremated in the end game scoring. I don't like Feast for Odin. I never have. The first time I played it and this last time I played it, I scored half the score of everyone else that I was playing with. Didn't even get close to 100 points. I think I had about 50 or so in each of the 2 times I had played this. I guess I just don't like that idea that, okay, I have to just give myself a whole bunch of shit to focus on early in the game. And again, sort of be told, ignore your main board, focus on these other boards when there's so many other things I'm trying to do. I also don't feel like this game does what I like of his other games, which is give you this idea of I'm managing a business and I'm trying to find the best path of an engine that I can build to support that business. So Fields of Arl, the Black Forest game, which I think I still have sitting down here, they kind of incentivize you to come up with a strategy. Okay, I'm going to play the cow game. I'm going to play the Fields of Wheat game, and I'm going to get myself buildings and focus on the various actions that let that business of mine thrive. So maybe I have a bunch of sheep and I'm going to, shave those sheep every round. I'm going to get a ton of wool and I'm going to send that wool off to get upgraded into something else. I'm going to sell that off for huge points, huge money, whatever I'm going to be doing in the particular game that I'm playing. And there really isn't much of that in Feast for Odin. There is a little bit of idea if you can get some animals going. There are some actions that you can take to maybe upgrade those or sort of, again, shear those sheep and get the wool. Then you have to convert those things into the green or blue tiles, etc., etc., etc. And it just becomes a lot of repetition at that point because I'm going to go here and I'm going to get the wool and I'm going to go here and turn that wool into something else that I can place wherever I want. And that is if no one else takes that spot, because I feel like you're a lot more restricted in the actions you can take here. If someone takes that spot you were going to go for, then you are just stuck until the next round. And it's definitely a game where turn order makes much more of an impact in the gameplay than a lot of his other games. I guess I can see the popularity of it, although I wonder how many people who have played Feast for Odin have played games like Hallertau or Fields of Arle and maybe haven't just quite seen how good I think his other games can be over Feast for Odin. I played this to make Daniel happy. He had a good time, kicked my ass for sure. I don't really care if I ever play Feast for Odin again. And the last game I will talk about here in this 99th episode is Everdell Emerland. I talked about this one. I have, of course, now played every Everdell game that there is except for Everdell Duo or Duel, whichever one it is, which I have heard I would probably not care for. This is a very, very similar formula to pretty much all the other Everdell games. You have workers. You're placing these workers out onto a board to mainly get additional resources. You're also going to have a hand of cards. You're playing those cards into a tableau in front of you, which are going to do a number of things. They may just give you additional resources, in which case some of those cards will trigger multiple times throughout the game. They may give you points. They may give you sort of a end game thing to work towards. They may give you sort of a little bit of an engine building element. I think there are these blue cards where when you play them, when you play that card, they then put into effect for you. So there's a couple cards I always go for that say whenever you play a creature card, you'll get a resource. Whenever you play a building card, you get a resource. If you get both of those into play, then you just constantly have this stream of resources coming in, which help you to play more cards. It builds quite a nice little engine for you if you can get those cards into play, if you can find them. And that's always a challenge with these games, is getting the cards that sort of play into your style, the way that you like to play these games. If you can find the cards that work with your play style and get them into play quickly, they will generally, make you much more powerful. But there are a couple of neat twists with this. For one thing, there is now this idea of a small and a large worker, kind of like viticulture, but not quite. So a lot of the Everdell games are kind of limited in worker locations. Okay, if I put a worker there, it's blocked, no one else can go there. Well, now you can put a worker where there already is a worker, even one of your own, but you have to send a small worker with it as kind of like a liaison. They're kind of like, they're going to, work with that other worker there to let you share that space with them, and you get the same benefits that you would normally get. But if you're going to a space where there is no other worker, or if you send two of your small workers, one to act as a liaison, the other one then becomes a helper. And if you get to use a small worker as a helper, you double the rewards that you get from that space, which can be quite juicy if used in the right timing. Another big element of this is that these cards are, for the first time, two-sided, which makes for a little bit of a unique challenge. But first of all, the cards have sort of an A side and a B side. The A side will show you a little strip on the bottom that tells you what that card does if and when it gets upgraded. You will take an action from the main board, usually spending the emerald crystal, gems, whatever, to flip a card over. And when it flips over, it's going to give you better benefits. A lot of times, if it's like the green cards, there is the brown card that just triggers once when it's played. and I think there's one other card. I think there's only 2 cards that trigger when played. But when you flip those cards over, they immediately trigger again, which makes for this really nice timing effect. Okay, I'm going to get this card played, I get a benefit. My next turn, maybe right away, I'm going to flip that card over. I'm going to get that benefit again, and now it's a better benefit than when I first played it. And again, those green cards, typical to the other Everdell games, they trigger in the fall and like spring, something like that. There's twice in the game that they can trigger. And so if you can get that card out early, let it trigger in the next round, then upgrade it to trigger it again, then it triggers again in another round, that card really pays off for you pretty well by the end of the game. There's also one other neat twist to this. There is a new type of card. There's one that they got rid of, but I can't even remember what it was. But there's now this orange card. When these play, they play it in your tableau. When you play them, nothing happens. But however, on one of your turns, instead of a regular action of either playing a card or placing out a worker, you can activate one of your orange cards in your tableau by tucking a card from your hand underneath it. That card doesn't give you any points. Basically, you're just trashing a card from your hand to then activate that card in your tableau. Now, in a unique twist, they can only be activated a certain number of times. They will tell you how many cards you can have maximum tucked underneath them. And that number does not change in any of the cards I've seen when you flip the card over, nor do you get to reactivate when you flip it over or anything like that. So in most cases, you want to play and upgrade an orange card before you ever use it, because you'll get the best benefits out of it being upgraded. And of course, you can use it then its maximum number of times. And then lastly, there is this track that kind of took this, I think, from the Spire Crest expansion of the base game. There is this like Lost Ruins track. And once per season, you can advance on that track. You have to spend any one or eventually any 2 resources. And then you have to discard a number of cards, at least 1, a minimum of 1, to advance on that track. When you do that, you then get to go into this bag and withdraw an artifact. You get to draw as many artifacts as cards you discarded, but you only ever get to keep 1 of those artifacts per draw, if you will. So at any time you advance on that track, you'll get to take 1 artifact. There are other cards that you can play that will let you, again, draw a number of artifacts and always keep 1. These things may give you extra resources. They may let you take an extra action. A lot of times they'll just give you some points. But generally, they're always good. And so as you advance on that track, you're going to be getting these artifacts, and eventually there's an end spot on that track. Whoever gets there first gets more points for the end of the game, etc., etc. Kind of typical standard stuff there. And I mentioned it's once per season. It's because you're limited into how far you can go on that track, depending on which season we are currently in. So if you don't advance it in a previous season, you're not stuck. That means in the next season you can advance, maybe 2 spaces or more. But then, again, you got to spend more resources, you got to spend more cards. So there's a lot of emphasis, as there always is in this game, of getting cards and getting resources, but a couple of other twists. Your maximum hand size is decreased. Your maximum number of cards in your tableau is decreased. Instead of 15 cards, it's only 12. Instead of a hand of 8, you can only have a hand of 6. You also have less workers to work with, and you're splitting your workers between those large and those smalls. And so it's a very, very tight game. There is a lot of, I feel like there's a lot more emphasis on just overall efficiency in this game, because a lot of the things that you're kind of used to doing from previous Everdells is a bit more restrained. It's a little tighter. They did try to free up some things that I feel like they've been constantly trying to reinvent the wheel on the events from the first game. If you remember the base Everdell, if you ever played it, there are certain things that you can get in the base game, but you have to have very, very specific cards in your tableau, and getting them is almost impossible in every game I've ever played of it. You need to have the church, you need to have the school teacher, you need to have the rainbow, I don't know, whatever. And you could just go fish in that deck forever trying to find the third of that card that you may need, and you'll just never find it in that massive deck of cards. And with every iteration of Everdell, they have tried to streamline that. I still think the best may have been Farshore. And in fact, I still think Farshore might be my favorite Everdell game. I kind of had always wished they'd come out come out with some expansions for it. They never have. They just kind of keep coming out with new base games, which is maybe a little frustrating, but maybe a wise business choice. I don't know. I kind of told myself I wasn't going to get this. I really do like the artwork. And in fact, it was that whole two-sided card thing that really made me bite the bullet on this game. I've already played it maybe 2 or 3 times by now. I really have enjoyed this. It is really thinky. Like I said, it's very, very tight. I do think your endgame scoring potential is higher than some of the previous games. It can still be very swingy, again, if you just don't get that good efficiency. If you don't get the stuff that you really need. You can draw a game. You draw a card late in the game, you go, God, this would have been great like an hour ago. Oh my gosh, what I could have done with this card if I had it, 3 seasons ago. Now it's worthless. Can't do anything with it. That's always kind of frustrating. But I have had a lot of fun with Everdell Emerland, and this one I do think I'll be keeping around. That is it for games played here in this 99th episode of the Weekly Ratchet. All right, question for next week. And this is what I'm really kind of looking forward to chatting about. How willing are you to join a local gaming group or event? You might have a group of people that you like to play with, but if you find out about a local group of folks who get together, maybe at a game store or maybe at a grocery store. It's actually really big here in my area. The Wegmans chain is a host to an awful lot of gaming events. Local brew pubs sometimes will have get-togethers. How willing are you to find out about those events, to get into those events? Maybe if you don't know anyone there, how do you feel when it comes to getting into something like that? We're going to dive into that a little bit here for episode 100. Other games to talk about, of course, in that episode as well. Stay tuned for that one. And until then, folks, cheers.